Your mission, should you choose to accept it. These iconic words have transcended their original medium, becoming a part of the cultural lexicon. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Men hanging on wires mere inches above the floor. That earworm theme song. Disturbingly lifelike masks revealing blockbuster action stars. The list goes on, much like the franchise that birthed these entertainment touchstones. Mission Impossible. What started as an episodic 60s spy show wound up as a massive film franchise, garnering over $3.5 billion at the box office. But in a world where seemingly every classic show has made an attempt at jumping onto the silver screen, what made Mission Impossible so successful? Well, a lot of that is down to Tom Cruise, but the road to a 6-film blockbuster franchise, with 2 more on the way, is hardly as simple as a single Hollywood star. Let's take it way back. No, further back. There we go. Television writer Bruce Geller had found success working on shows like Have Gun Will Travel and The Rifleman, before becoming co-executive producer of the hit western Rawhide for a season. A year later, he wrote, produced, and directed the pilot for a show of his own creation called Briggs Squad, which was inspired by his love of big-screen crime flicks. The show was named after the lead character, Dan Briggs, portrayed by Stephen Hill. Eventually, it was changed to IMF and then finally Mission Impossible. The central concept of the show was simple, brilliantly so. Each episode began with Briggs, who would later be replaced by Jim Phelps, played by Peter Graves, starting in the 2nd season, receiving a self-destructing message from his superiors in the Impossible Mission Force. This would describe the mission, the subjects therein, and would end by reminding Phelps that if he or his agents were found out, they would be disavowed. Phelps would then gather the best men and women for the job, many of them part of the show's rotating cast of guest stars. They would then accomplish their mission with impossible levels of skill and forethought, giving the viewers at home a tense, intricate look at the cunning, gadgetry, and master planning required for these often deadly tasks. They would eventually succeed, usually just in the nick of time, and the episode would end on a freeze frame as they made their getaway. Essentially, it was a big, mind-blowing heist flick every week, and viewers were hooked. It won the Emmy for Best Dramatic Series 2 years in a row and amassed a huge following, lasting 7 seasons before being canceled in 1973. The lone survivor of the 60s spy craze. Geller would also develop the hit show Mannix, but Mission Impossible would remain his greatest and most lasting contribution to television history before his untimely death in 1975, when the plane he was piloting crashed near Santa Barbara, California. Later, Mission Impossible wound up revived for 2 seasons in 1988, with the final mission for Jim Phelps and his crew airing on February 24th, 1990. Of course, the franchise was only getting started. The idea for a Mission Impossible movie began gestating at Paramount during the TV to big screen adaptation boom of the 80s and early 90s. The original Star Trek cast had been beaming up big box office receipts since 1982's Wrath of Khan, while 1987's The Untouchables, directed by Brian De Palma, wound up 4th in the domestic box office for that year. That same year, Dragnet came in at number 11, just under Predator, and ahead of big-ticket items like RoboCop and The Living Daylights. However, it wasn't until Tom Cruise entered the picture that some headway was made. Cruise started off his acting career like many before him. He moved to New York City and, after some trial and error, made his way to Los Angeles, where his friend Sean Penn suggested he check out the Creative Artists Agency, or CAA. It was here he met agent Paula Wagner, who saw something special in this driven young man. What happened next is pretty well-trod ground. Cruise began with small roles in Endless Love and Taps, along with good bud Sean Penn. Taps was almost a thankless job as a background artist, but director Harold Becker liked the way Cruise handled himself, and so he promoted Cruise to a supporting role. Then, in 1983, Cruise wound up in 4 feature films. First up was Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of The Outsiders, the same film which launched the careers of C. Thomas Howell, Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, and Rob Lowe. It debuted in March. April brought the more forgettable sex comedy Losing It, followed by the 1-2 punch of Risky Business in August and All the Right Moves in October. Risky business in particular was a massive boon, turning Cruise into a household name overnight. After a turn in Ridley Scott's bizarre fantasy flick Legend opposite Tim Curry's iconic devil-esque darkness, Cruise made his first big transition into the world of action cinema. Directed by Ridley's brother Tony Scott, Top Gun is arguably the first big moment for Cruise's rapidly accelerating career. In the same year he co-starred with Paul Newman in Martin Scorsese's The Color of Money, it was his turn as Maverick that made him a blockbuster star, earning the #1 spot at the box office that year. From here, Cruise seemed to have found steady box office smashing work in films like Cocktail, Rain Man, and A Few Good Men, and in Sidney Pollack's The Firm, he even worked along Briggs himself, Stephen Hill. This career path seemed to suggest a more serious side to the actor, one driven toward artistic excellence with an eye toward a certain golden statuette. His work on Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July in 1990 earned him his first nomination, as well as a Golden Globe win, and he'd go on to be nominated twice more in 1997 and 1999. Throughout all of this, Cruise decided that it was time to take the next step into full-blown action heroics. He and agent-turned-business partner Paula Wagner had created their own production company, appropriately called Cruise Wagner Productions, with the aim of giving him more control over his projects, as well as a higher percentage of their profits. They made a production deal with Paramount, and Cruise, in need of a hit, opted for action heroics as the next step in his career and as a means of starting off his new company with a bang. However, he knew he needed something that would work within his wheelhouse, something that relied on intelligent characters using brains over brawn to accomplish their goals, and he remembered a certain show from his childhood, which just so happened to be owned by Paramount. Rather than remake the show, the decision was made right off the bat to make it into a continuation, with Jim Phelps returning as, gasp, the villain. There was even a plan to begin the film with the entire original IMF team being killed off, but this was eventually rewritten to only include Phelps and a new team, of which Cruise's character Ethan Hunt would be the lone survivor, clearing the way for his turn as the franchise's young protagonist, who would literally win out against Phelps' enigmatic mastermind in the end. According to Peter Graves, he was never approached to play the role, and the part went to Jon Voight. Not that Graves had much interest in it, seeing as he felt that making Phelps the villain was a betrayal of the original series. Despite this, the film did contain a lot of elements prevalent in the series itself. From the opening plot that is straight out of an episode of Mission Impossible, to the lit fuse opening, which included a clip show of all the craziness that we could expect in the film, there's a lot there that's straight from the DNA of that original 1966 series. To direct, Cruise handpicked Brian De Palma, who was perhaps best known for Carrie and Dressed to Kill, and who had of course made The Untouchables back in 1987. It was a calculated risk, giving such an artistically inclined director the reins, but Cruise's plan worked out well. By the time the film wrapped in 1995, under budget and ahead of schedule, what they had was an action film with a unique pedigree. Stylish direction by De Palma, and an elevated, albeit perhaps too complicated script from Hollywood legends David Koepp and Robert Towne, a script which didn't actually have a finished version well into shooting, with much of it being constructed in order to facilitate the film's action sequences, of which, considering what latter entries became most famous for, are few and far between. For these set pieces, Tom Cruise wound up doing a majority of his own stunts, with his stuntman usually going through the motions to work out the intricacies. This one, involving several tons of water, was deemed unusable with the stuntman by De Palma, who asked Cruise himself to do it despite some serious danger involved. Still, Cruise did it, and with minimal injury. Later on, for the film's big climactic train set piece, Cruise managed to finagle an actual train for chunks of the action while utilizing a soundstage and blue screen for the more outlandish, dangerous elements, like the big helicopter crash. For these scenes, a massive wind machine was used so that the wind hitting Cruise's face looked as real as possible. However, the most iconic and oft-referenced set piece contains zero explosions or wind turbines, instead relying on pure, sweat-inducing tension, which, considering De Palma's oft-documented love of Hitchcock, shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Hunt and company breaking into CIA headquarters to steal the knock list is predicated entirely on him hanging over a pressure-sensitive floor and not making a sound while basically just downloading some files onto a floppy disk. It's absolutely nerve-wracking and really is just built around the idea of one guy trying to not sweat too much. It's a downright perfect masterclass in suspense and continues to be parodied and remade to this day. Released on May 22, 1996, Mission Impossible opened to mostly positive reviews, which praised De Palma's direction and set pieces while harping on the film's often befuddling plot. Of course, Hollywood's success is based primarily on the numbers, and Cruise Wagner Productions had a certifiable hit that wound up number 3 at the 1996 box office, just behind Twister and Independence Day, with a total gross of over $180 million. Immediately, Cruise demanded a sequel. But De Palma wasn't interested, and left Cruise to find a replacement. If Mission Impossible relied too heavily on its befuddling plot, Mission Impossible 2 wound up being the opposite, focusing more on action and character than plot, which, in this iteration, wound up simple to a fault. According to Robert Towne, brought back once more for screenwriting duties, the plot was once again secondary to the set pieces, which here would be upgraded considerably with a director who knew a thing or two about action, John Woo. The Hong Kong action god, who had made his transition into the US market with 1993's Jean-Claude Van Damme vehicle Hard Target, before working with John Travolta on Broken Arrow and Face Off, had had reasonable success stateside. Cruise told Woo that he loved Face Off and was of course a huge fan of his Hong Kong output, and to put his own stamp on the film. Now Cruise had decided that each film would have a different style from a different director. Woo had carte blanche to do his thing, which wound up feeling extremely dissident from the first film, in which Hunt doesn't even fire a gun. According to Woo, the movie's all about character, all about romance, and that is somewhat true. While the first movie was cold and mostly disinterested in characterization, much like the TV show, this entry brought in a love interest in the form of Thandie Newton as Nia, the ex-girlfriend of Dougray Scott's villainous rogue IMF agent, Sean Ambrose, sort of the 006 to Hunt's 007. This love triangle would prove a bit too melodramatic for many critics, but the style and theatrics behind Woo's approach proved to be a hit, thanks in large part to the absurd action on display, much of which once again featured Tom Cruise doing his own stunts, including free climbing in Utah, an intense motorcycle chase, heaps of gunfights and explosions, doves, and a knife stunt so dangerous that it honestly just looks like CGI. Yeah, that's a real knife. Just touching Tom Cruise's eyelash. No biggie. Mission Impossible 2, widely considered the worst of the franchise, wound up being the #1 movie of 2000, netting $500 million in worldwide receipts, leaving movies like X-Men and Charlie's Angels in the dust. The first entry was no fluke. Cruise had a massive franchise on his hands, but the formula wasn't quite right. For the third mission, development took a little bit longer. David Fincher was attached in 2002, however, he dropped out due to creative differences. Then the same thing happened with Joe Carnahan, who worked with Cruise for 15 months before deciding that it just wasn't for him in 2004. This led to J.J. Abrams being brought on board, whose obligations to Alias and Lost delayed Part 3 for a year. In 2005, Paramount gave the green light, albeit with a pay cut for Cruise. Featuring a handful of pretty cool stunts, including this show-stopping bridge attack, Mission Impossible 3 wound up being at once the least and most transformative for the series. On the one hand, the action sequences are nowhere near as intricately crafted as their predecessors, and the Abrams style is far more commercially inclined. But on the other hand, the story's central heist sequence at the Vatican and the heart-stopping finale make for a cracking IMF adventure. More importantly, for the whole of the franchise, Mission Impossible 3 introduces key characters who would prove vital going forward. Simon Pegg as Benji and Hunt's fiancée Julia, played by Michelle Monaghan, would both go on to show up and influence the next 3 films, as well as provide more personal connections for Ethan Hunt, marking a change of pace from the colder, episodic concept of the original series. Team dynamics became more important, however, something far more integral to the TV series and to the franchise going forward. It also ended on a very final note, with Hunt moving on from the IMF to spend his life with Julia. And that really could have been the end.
Dad, Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet.
2005 and 2006 were tough years for Tom Cruise and his relationship with Paramount. Their parent company, Viacom, had allowed the re-airing of a South Park episode deeply critical of Cruise and Scientology, and Cruise's public appeal had become shaky after his couch-jumping antics, extreme views on psychiatry, and deeper scrutiny of his religious leanings. Plus, he was raking in quite a bit of the profit from his work with Paramount, with Mission Impossible 3 faltering at the box office, a success but a downgrade with a total of just under $400 million worldwide. Things only got worse, and it all spiraled into an ugly split with the studio, who ended their 14-year relationship with Cruise Wagner Productions. Luckily for fans of the franchise, Cruise has a history of massaging his public image, and in 2008, he delivered the 1-2 punch of Tropic Thunder and Valkyrie.
You know how you handle an actor? They whine about anything. You pull down their pants and you spank their ass.
The first was a hilarious supporting role as a crazed movie executive, effectively lampooning Cruise's wild man image without directly targeting his beliefs, while the second was a return to more serious fare, with Cruise's real-life historical character orchestrating the plot to kill Hitler. It was also the first time he worked with future collaborator, Valkyrie screenwriter Christopher McQuarrie. As for his other collaborator, Paula Wagner, that partnership soon fizzled. After the Paramount deal fell apart, the two moved on immediately to take over United Artists, where, as CEO, Wagner oversaw Valkyrie and Lions for Lambs before departing for other endeavors. Suffice it to say that the end of UA was near, and Cruise soon moved on to other projects, including Mission Impossible 4. Since 2006's third installment, Cruise had yet to headline a real blockbuster. Valkyrie had moderate success, while 2010's Night and Day remains one of the worst openings of Cruise's career as a headlining star. Earlier that same year, he announced that he would be starring in another Mission Impossible, with the title Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol revealed in October. Abrams stayed on as producer, while director Brad Bird, most famous for his work with Pixar, made his live-action debut. Ghost Protocol brought along the potential for a big change-up, casting Jeremy Renner as a combative fellow agent who must help Ethan Hunt and his fellow agents track down a rogue nuclear physicist after the Kremlin is bombed and the entire IMF team is disavowed. It was a sort of open secret, due partially to Cruise's less than stellar track record over the years, that the franchise might see a soft reboot so that Paramount might be able to continue without the extra baggage. Hence the inclusion of Renner, seemingly the go-to replacement for spy franchise stars. Ghost Protocol is more comedic in tone than any other entry. Simon Pegg's Benji was brought back as an integral part of the team, and most of the series' famed gadgetry was reduced to gags. Not even the self-destructing mission brief works properly, and one of the big set pieces is the use of this outrageous holographic wall, a nod to a Season 4 episode of the original series. There's even a prison breakout set to a Dean Martin song. It's a really fun time. That said, it's not without its fair share of drama, killing off Josh Holloway in the opening sequence and blowing up the Kremlin in just the first half hour or so. Once again, this was a film built not just on thrilling sequences of tension and espionage, but also good old-fashioned spectacle. Here we also see an even greater reliance on stunts than ever before, with Cruise going all in and evolving the series into almost a showcase for these intense acts of extreme precision and death-defying showmanship. While the famous climb up the Burj Khalifa was an extremely controlled sequence, it was still Hollywood big shot Tom Cruise climbing and swinging around the world's tallest building without the use of a stunt double, the kind of press-building insanity that was absent from 3. It also ditched the relationship drama of the previous two, going back to basics and focusing on the mission at hand. Now that worked. Unlike its predecessor, Ghost Protocol was a huge hit for Paramount. The reviews were glowing, and it was the 5th highest grossing film of 2011 at the worldwide box office, and taking the crown as Cruise's highest grossing movie thus far, taking in slightly under $700 million in total.
Whew! That was not easy.
For all the broken tech in the film, Ghost Protocol was a true return to form for both Cruise and the franchise as a whole. Soon the notion of Ethan Hunt exiting became a distant memory. The following year, Cruise started up a new franchise, Jack Reacher. While it would eventually lead to an underwhelming sequel and not much else, the film was a slow burn success that also brought together Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise in a director-actor relationship. One that quickly blossomed into the 5th entry in the Mission Impossible franchise, Rogue Nation.
He will be called upon to answer for every wanton act of mayhem he is responsible for.
McQuarrie had also written 2014's Edge of Tomorrow and brought with him a strong creative connection with Cruise, as well as an intense love and knowledge of action cinema and storytelling. One major throwback in Rogue Nation was the inclusion of the Syndicate, which in the original show was essentially a mafia-esque group with ties to whatever criminal enterprise the series needed it for, and was teased at the very end of Ghost Protocol. Here, it would operate in a similar, albeit grander scale, sort of like Spectre in the James Bond films. Of course, we have to talk about stunts. Rogue Nation, like Part 2, begins with Tom Cruise hanging off something at dangerous heights, in this case an Airbus 400, a stunt he of course performed himself. From there, everyone's favorite diminutive IMF agent went helmetless to prove he was really the one in control during this series' highlight motorcycle chase, and of course, learned to hold his breath for 6 minutes for this scene, which of course could have been done with the magic of film editing, but Thomas Cruise Mapother IV is gonna Thomas Cruise Mapother IV. Rogue Nation doesn't necessarily do anything to greatly separate itself from past installments. Instead, McQuarrie and Cruise made the tactical decision to take everything that had come before and toss it in a blender. Everything that made previous installments work are present in some capacity. Smart cribbing from the original show, carefully integrated humor.
A minute ago you were dead. What are you talking about?
A mysterious villain portrayed by a serious, artistically inclined actor, and all the headline-grabbing stunts you can shake a stick at. All this while just being damn entertaining and, in the end, netting a worldwide gross of nearly $700 million. McQuarrie then pulled a series first and came back to direct the follow-up installment, 2018's Mission Impossible Fallout. This one just, well, it took everything Rogue Nation did and turned it up to 11, while also opting for a far more epic look and feel, boosted by Ex Machina and Annihilation cinematographer Rob Hardy, whom McQuarrie specifically chose as part of his goal to differentiate his 2 entries, keeping in line with that old Cruise edict of a different director for each installment.
I was determined to have multiple stunts and have all of those stunts be, in some way or another, uniquely challenging.
For Fallout, Cruise learned to fly a helicopter in a matter of months, so once again, he could do the film's big action sequence himself. This included climbing up a rope in midair, falling, and convincing the cast and crew that they just lost their star. He also went on 106 halo jumps for a scene that, again, very easily could have been done with CGI, but then it wouldn't be quite as cool, now would it? Finally, what should have been just another cool action sequence overshadowed by these bigger spectacles, the big headline moment came when Cruise jumped from one roof to another and, hitting just short of his target, broke his ankle on camera, only to continue running.
Put pressure on his foot and snapped it.
And yes, that take is in the movie.
First thing he did was turn to the camera operator and say, "Did you get that?"
Fallout wound up bringing in $791 million, making it Cruise's best ever worldwide and domestically second only to War of the Worlds. It's also considered by many, myself included, to be the best of the series, perfectly marrying all of the ingredients that make the series work. With parts 7 and 8 currently on their way, the former scheduled for summer 2022, the sky appears to be the limit with Mission Impossible. While it's no Marvel flick seemingly netting $1 billion at a time with ease, the franchise has made it through some serious hurdles to get where it is today, and despite some attempts at changing the status quo and even angering the show's cast early on, it remains a reliable showcase for everything that made the TV series so popular. Riveting games of extreme espionage, cool gadgets, skilled characters, and the kind of plots that make you go, wait, really? With the additional big Hollywood action and, yes, the living charisma engine that is Tom Cruise, it's just a winning formula. Much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its producer Kevin Feige, the Mission Impossible movie franchise is, at the end of the day, a product born from the mind of one creative and aggressively focused individual, in turn aided by a cast and crew made up of some of the most talented people in the industry. The show it's based on is, of course, a hallmark of 60s television and a template upon which the series continues to expand on and utilize with both respect and innovation. With these forces combined, it's no wonder audiences continue to accept this mission. So does a joke that bad get hazard pay, or...
And you really think we can do this?
We're going to do it.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it,